The blizzard hit so fast that I barely made it through the cabin door before the wind tried to rip it from my frozen fingers, and the figure, already inside, turned toward me with yellow eyes that glowed in the firelight like twin moons. I stumbled backward, my hand instinctively going to the knife at my belt, but my fingers were too numb to grip it properly. Snow swirled in through the open doorway behind me, and I stood there shaking, trying to decide whether freezing to death in the storm was preferable to whatever fate awaited me here. The orc woman rose slowly from where she had been crouched by the hearth, and she was taller than I expected, broad-shouldered and powerful in a way that made my own frame seem slight by comparison. Her green skin caught the firelight in shades of jade and emerald, and the small tusks that curved up from her lower jaw gleamed white against her full lips. She wore thick furs that looked travel-worn, and her long black hair was braided back from a face that was at once foreign and striking. "Close the door," she said, her voice deeper than I expected but not unkind. "You are letting in the cold." I hesitated, still half ready to bolt back into the storm despite the insanity of that choice. My body made the decision for me when my knees buckled, and I had to grab the doorframe to keep from collapsing entirely. The trek up the mountain had taken everything I had, and finding the cabin had felt like a miracle right up until the moment I discovered it was already occupied. "Close the door," she repeated, more firmly this time, "or we will both freeze." There was logic in that, cold and simple, so I shouldered the door shut against the screaming wind and stood there dripping melted snow onto the rough wooden floor. The cabin was small, just one room with a stone hearth, a rough-hewn table, and a single bed piled with furs in the corner. Supplies were stacked neatly along one wall, and I could see the orc woman had been here long enough to make herself comfortable. "I did not know anyone was here," I said, my teeth chattering so hard I could barely form the words. "I was just trying to get out of the storm." She studied me with those unsettling yellow eyes, her expression unreadable. "You are far from any settlement." "What brings a human to this mountain in winter?" "Bad luck," I managed, wrapping my arms around myself. My coat was soaked through, and I could not feel my toes inside my boots. "I was hunting, and the storm came up faster than I expected." It was not quite the truth, but it was close enough. I had been hunting, but I had also been running from decisions I did not want to make and questions I did not want to answer. My father wanted me to marry the daughter of a neighboring farmer, a practical match that would unite our lands and strengthen both families. Isabella Stevens was a fine woman by all accounts, but I could not bring myself to commit to a life that felt like a cage closing around me. So I had taken my bow and some provisions and told my father I would be gone a few days, maybe a week. That had been 5 days ago. The orc woman gestured toward the fire. "Sit before you collapse. You will be no good to anyone if you freeze." I stumbled forward and sank down onto the stone hearth, holding my hands toward the flames with a groan of relief. The heat was almost painful against my frozen skin, but I welcomed it anyway. Behind me, I heard the orc moving around, and I tensed, half expecting to feel a blade between my shoulders at any moment. Instead, she draped a dry blanket over my shoulders and set a clay cup of something hot in my hands. "Drink," she commanded. I looked down at the cup, then up at her, suspicious despite my desperation. She rolled her eyes, an expression that looked oddly human on her alien face. "It is pine needle tea," she said. "If I wanted you dead, I would simply throw you back outside." That was fair enough. I took a sip and nearly choked on the bitter, resinous taste, but the warmth that spread through my chest was worth it. I took another sip, then another, feeling the shaking in my limbs gradually subside. The orc woman returned to her spot by the fire, sitting cross-legged on a folded fur. She pulled a whetstone from her pack and began sharpening a hunting knife with long, practiced strokes. The sound was rhythmic and oddly soothing. "My name is Isaac Sanders," I said after a while, because the silence felt heavy and I did not know what else to do. She did not look up from her work. "Freya Frostborn. That is not an orc name," I said before I could stop myself. Now she did look up, and there was something sharp in her gaze. "My clan cast me out 2 years ago. I chose a new name when I left. Is that acceptable to you, human?" I held up my hands in a placating gesture. I did not mean to offend. I was just surprised. "Most humans are surprised when orcs speak their language at all," Freya said, returning her attention to the knife. "They expect us to grunt and snarl like animals." I felt heat rise in my face that had nothing to do with the fire. She was right, of course. Most of what I knew about orcs came from stories told around village hearths, tales of raids and violence and savage strength. I had never actually met an orc before, and I was ashamed to realize how many assumptions I had made in the space of a few minutes. "I am sorry," I said quietly. "You are right. I should not have presumed." Freya paused in her sharpening, looking at me with what might have been surprise. "You apologize to an orc." "I apologize when I am wrong," I said. "Should that be different because you are an orc?" Something flickered across her face too quickly for me to read. She set down the knife and whetstone and leaned back against the wall. "You are an unusual human, Isaac Sanders." "So I have been told," I said, managing a tired smile. Outside, the wind howled like a living thing, and I could hear the snow beating against the walls and roof. Freya glanced toward the door, then back at me. "That storm will last through the night at least," she said. "Possibly longer. This cabin is well stocked and the roof is sound. We will wait it out together." Those words hung in the air between us, a statement and a promise and a question all at once. "We will wait it out together." I nodded slowly, setting down the empty cup. "Thank you," I said, "for not throwing me back outside." The corner of her mouth twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "The night is young. I may yet change my mind." I laughed despite myself, a startled sound that seemed to surprise us both. Freya shook her head and returned to sharpening her knife, but some of the tension had left her shoulders. I peeled off my soaked coat and boots, hanging them near the fire to dry. My inner layers were damp but not soaked through, so I kept them on and wrapped the blanket tighter around my shoulders. The warmth and the exhaustion were catching up with me, and I had to fight to keep my eyes open. "There is food in the pack by the bed," Freya said without looking up. "Help yourself." I wanted to protest that I did not want to take her supplies, but my stomach growled loudly enough that she definitely heard it. She gave me a pointed look, and I got to my feet with as much dignity as I could manage and rummaged through the pack. I found dried meat, hard cheese, and some kind of flatbread wrapped in cloth. It was simple fare, but it tasted like a feast after the day I had endured. I brought some of the food back to the hearth and offered it to Freya. She hesitated, then took a piece of the cheese with a nod of acknowledgement. We ate in silence for a while, listening to the storm rage outside. "Why did they cast you out?" I asked eventually, then immediately regretted it. "Sorry, that is none of my business." Freya was quiet for so long that I thought she was not going to answer. Then she said, "I refuse to kill a human child." I stared at her, the piece of bread halfway to my mouth. "What?" She met my gaze steadily. "There was a raid on a frontier farm. My clan wanted to send a message to show strength and inspire fear. They would have killed everyone, including the children. I could not stand by and watch that happen. I fought my own clan to give that family time to flee." She paused. "They survived. I was exiled." I swallowed hard, trying to process what she was telling me. You gave up everything for strangers. I gave up a clan that had lost its honor, Freya corrected. There is a difference between strength and cruelty. My father understood that once, but he is dead now, and the new chieftain cares only for blood and terror. She looked away. I do not regret my choice, but I am alone because of it. The pain in her voice was raw and honest, and I felt something twist in my chest. I knew what it was like to feel trapped between duty and conscience, even if my own struggles seemed small compared to hers. You did the right thing, I said quietly. Freya laughed, but there was no humor in it. The right thing left me wandering the wilderness with no home and no people. The right thing is cold comfort on a winter night. You are not alone right now, I said before I could stop myself. She turned to look at me, something unreadable in her yellow eyes. No, she said softly. I suppose I am not. The storm did not let up through the night. We took turns feeding the fire and keeping watch, though watch for what I was not entirely sure. I dozed fitfully on the floor near the hearth, wrapped in the blanket Freya had given me. She insisted I take the bed, but I refused, arguing that she had been here first. We eventually compromised with me on the floor and her taking the bed, though I suspected she did not sleep much either. When dawn came, or what passed for dawn behind the wall of snow and clouds, the storm was still howling. Freya stood by the single window peering out at the white-on-white landscape. I have never seen a storm this fierce, she said. We may be here for days. The thought should have alarmed me, but instead, I felt an odd sense of calm. Days trapped in a cabin with a stranger should have been a nightmare, but somehow it did not feel that way. Maybe I was still too tired to process the situation properly. Then I suppose we should make the best of it, I said, getting stiffly to my feet. My muscles ached from sleeping on the hard floor, but the fire had kept me warm enough through the night. Freya glanced at me. You are taking this well. Most humans would be terrified to be trapped with an orc. Are you planning to hurt me? I asked. No. Then I have nothing to be terrified of, I said simply. She studied me for a long moment, then shook her head. You are very strange, Isaac Sanders. So you said last night, I replied, unable to stop a small smile. We fell into an routine of sorts. Freya had been planning to wait out the winter in the cabin, so her supplies were extensive. There was dried meat and fish, hard cheese, flour and salt, dried berries and nuts, and even some root vegetables stored in a cold box outside. We rationed carefully, not knowing how long the storm would last, and prepared simple meals over the fire. I discovered that Freya was an excellent cook, despite the limited ingredients. She made a stew from dried meat and stored vegetables that was rich and flavorful, seasoned with herbs I did not recognize. When I complimented her, she seemed surprised. Orc food is not supposed to be good, she said with a trace of bitterness. We are supposed to eat raw meat and drink blood, according to your human stories. I winced. I am starting to think most human stories about orcs are not very accurate. You are correct, she said, but it is easier to kill monsters than people. Your kind prefers the stories that make us monsters. I could not argue with that. I had heard plenty of those stories myself, had believed them without question until yesterday. Now, watching Freya carefully portion out the stew into wooden bowls, I felt ashamed of my ignorance. We talked more as the day wore on. I told her about my family's farm, about my father's hopes for me, and the marriage I was trying to avoid. She listened without judgment, and when I finished, she said, "You do not want to spend your life on a farm." It is not that, I said, struggling to put my feelings into words. I like the farm well enough, but I want to choose my own path, not have it chosen for me. I want to see what else is out there before I settle down forever. Freya nodded slowly. I understand that. It is why I left my clan in the end. Even before the exile, I felt trapped by expectations and traditions that did not fit me. What would you have done if you could choose anything? I asked. She was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. I would have been a ranger, she said finally. One of the wandering protectors who keeps the wild places safe. My father was a ranger before he became a warrior. He taught me to track and hunt, to read the land and the sky. But female orcs are expected to be mothers and healers, not warriors or rangers. She smiled faintly. Another tradition that did not fit me. You would make a good ranger, I said. You clearly know what you are doing out here. And you, she asked. What would you do if you could choose anything? I had to think about that. No one had ever asked me that question before, not even my own father. I think I would travel, I said slowly. See different places, meet different people, maybe be a trader or a guide, something that lets me move around and experience new things. Your father would not approve, Freya said. No, I agreed. He would not. We were quiet for a while, both lost in thoughts of paths not taken and futures we could not quite see. Outside, the wind continued to howl, and the snow piled higher against the walls. The second day of the storm, I woke to find Freya already up and dressed in her furs, preparing to go outside. I sat up quickly, alarmed. Where are you going? I asked. You cannot go out in that. The cold box needs to be checked, she said, wrapping a scarf around her neck and lower face. And we need more firewood. I will only be a moment. I will come with you, I said, reaching for my boots. You do not need to. 2 people can work faster than one, I interrupted. And if something goes wrong, it is better not to be alone. She looked like she wanted to argue, but finally nodded. Stay close to the cabin. The visibility is almost zero. We bundled up in every layer we had and tied a rope around our waists, connecting us to each other and to the cabin door. The wind hit us like a physical force the moment we stepped outside, and I could barely see Freya even though she was only an arm's length away. The snow was waist-deep in places, and the cold was so intense it burned my lungs with every breath. We struggled to the cold box first, a simple wooden crate dug into the snow on the north side of the cabin. Freya pulled out a few roots and another wrapped package of dried fish, and I helped her secure the lid again. Then we made our way to the woodpile, which was partially buried but still accessible. Carrying the wood back to the cabin was brutal work. The wind tried to tear it from our arms, and several times I lost my footing in the deep snow. But Freya was there each time, her strong hand gripping my arm and hauling me upright. By the time we stumbled back through the cabin door, we were both shaking with cold and exhaustion. That was foolish, Freya said through chattering teeth, slamming the door behind us. We should have waited for the storm to break. We need the wood, I pointed out, dropping my armload by the hearth. And now we have it. She glared at me, but there was no real anger in it. We huddled by the fire, warming our frozen hands and feet. When I looked over at Freya, I noticed frost clinging to her eyebrows and eyelashes, and without thinking, I reached over and gently brushed it away. She froze at the touch, her yellow eyes going wide. I realized what I had done and jerked my hand back, face burning. Sorry, I muttered. You had ice on your face. Freya touched her face where my fingers had been, still looking stunned. I did not think a human would ever willingly touch an orc, she said quietly. Why not? I asked, confused. You are a person, not a plague carrier. She laughed, a surprised sound. Most humans would disagree with you. Then most humans are idiots, I said flatly. That made her laugh harder, a real laugh this time that crinkled the corners of her eyes and made her tusks gleam. The sound was warm and genuine, and I found myself smiling in response. Something shifted between us in that moment, subtle but undeniable. The wariness that had colored our interactions began to fade, replaced by something that felt almost like friendship. The third day, the storm showed no signs of stopping. We were running low on fresh water, so Freya showed me how to melt snow safely and purify it with a few drops of pine resin. We took turns cranking the fire bellows and stirring the pot, working in comfortable silence. "Tell me about your family," Freya said at one point. "You mentioned your father, but what about your mother, siblings?" "My mother died when I was 12, I said. "Fever took her one winter. It is just my father and me now. I had a younger sister, but she died with my mother." The old grief was still there, but it had softened with time into something I could carry. "What about you? Do orcs have families like humans do?" "We have clans," Freya said. "Large extended families that live and hunt together. I had 3 brothers and 2 sisters. My mother was the clan healer." Her expression darkened. "I do not know if they still live. I have not seen them since my exile." "Do you miss them?" I asked gently. "Every day," she admitted. "But I cannot go back. To be exiled is to be dead in the eyes of the clan. If I returned, they would be honor-bound to kill me." I could not imagine that kind of finality, that complete severing of all family ties. "That seems cruel." "It is meant to be," Freya said. "Exile is the worst punishment an orc can face, worse than death. It is reserved for the greatest betrayals." She paused. "Though I do not see saving children as a betrayal." "Neither do I," said firmly. She gave me a small, grateful smile. "Thank you, Isaac." Hearing her say my name sent an odd flutter through my chest. I busied myself with checking the water, not wanting her to see whatever expression was on my face. That evening, we played a dice game Freya taught me, using small stones as markers. She won most of the rounds, but I managed to claim a few victories through sheer luck. We laughed and talked, and for a little while, I forgot about the storm outside and the complications waiting for me back home. At one point, Freya leaned forward to collect her winnings, and I noticed a scar running along her jaw, half hidden by her green skin. Without thinking, I asked, "How did you get that scar?" She touched it self-consciously. "A wolf when I was young. I was hunting alone and got too confident. It taught me a valuable lesson about respecting my prey." "You hunt alone a lot?" I asked. "I have no choice," she said simply. "No clan, no hunting party, just me." The loneliness in her voice made my heart ache. I reached across the space between us and placed my hand over hers. "You are not alone right now." Freya looked down at our hands, her expression unreadable. For a moment I thought she might pull away, but instead she turned her hand over and laced her fingers through mine. Her palm was warm and calloused from hard work, her grip strong but careful. "No," she said softly. "I am not alone right now." We stayed like that for a long moment, hands clasped in the firelight, the storm howling outside. It felt significant somehow, like we had crossed some invisible threshold. When we finally let go and returned to the game, the air between us felt charged with possibility. The 4th day, I woke to the sound of silence. For a moment I thought I had gone deaf, and then I realized what was missing. The wind had stopped. I sat up quickly, looking toward the window. The shutters were closed, but no snow was beating against them. Beside me, I heard Freya stir. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice rough with sleep. I got up and carefully opened the shutters. Bright sunlight poured into the cabin, so intense after days of gloom that I had to shield my eyes. Outside, the world was buried in snow, but the sky above was clear and blue. "It is over," I said, something like disappointment settling in my chest. Freya came to stand beside me, and we looked out at the transformed landscape together. The snow had drifted as high as the cabin roof in places, and the trees were buried to their lowest branches. It would take days for the pass to be clear enough for travel. "You will be able to leave soon," Freya said, her tone carefully neutral. "I suppose so," I replied, equally careful. Neither of us moved from the window. The sunlight caught in Freya's black hair, bringing out hints of blue, and her profile was striking against the bright snow. I wanted to say something, to acknowledge the strange connection we had built over the past few days, but I did not know how to put it into words. "We should check the damage," Freya said finally, stepping back. "Make sure the roof held in the woodpile is still intact." We spent the morning digging out from the storm. The cold box had survived, as had most of the woodpile, though some of it was scattered across the clearing. We worked together to restack it, falling back into the easy rhythm we had developed over the past days. When we finally came back inside for lunch, we were both tired but satisfied. Freya made another pot of stew, and we ate while the afternoon sun streamed through the window. "When will you go?" she asked eventually. "I am not sure," I said honestly. "The pass will not be clear for a while yet, and I do not have a good reason to hurry back." "What about your father? He will be worried." "Probably," I admitted, "but he knows I can take care of myself." "And I told him I might be gone a week or more." I paused. "What about you? Will you stay here through the winter?" "That was my plan," Freya said. "This cabin is abandoned, and it is far enough from any settlement that I will not be bothered. I can hunt and trap, and I have enough supplies to last until spring." "That sounds lonely," I said quietly. She met my eyes. It was going to be, before the storm. The weight of what she was not saying hung between us. Before the storm, before I stumbled through her door and changed everything. Before we spent 4 days learning to trust each other, to talk and laugh and simply be together. "I do not want to go back," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "To my father's farm and his plans for my life. I want something different, but I do not know what." "You could stay here," Freya said, so quietly I almost missed it. I stared at her. "What?" She looked away, and I could see color rising in her green cheeks. "Just for a while, until you decide what you want to do. The cabin is big enough for 2, and another set of hands would be useful for hunting and gathering wood." She paused. "If you want." My heart was suddenly pounding. "You would let me stay?" "I am asking you to stay," Freya said, still not looking at me. "Unless you do not want to." "I want to," I said quickly. "I absolutely want to." Now she did look at me, and there was hope in her yellow eyes, vulnerable and bright. "Truly, truly," I confirmed. "I have never felt as comfortable with anyone as I do with you. These past few days, even trapped by the storm, have been the best days I have had in a long time." Freya smiled, and it was like the sun coming out after a long winter. "I feel the same way." We grinned at each other like fools, and I felt something warm and bright unfurling in my chest. This was not what I had expected when I set out on my hunting trip, but it felt right in a way nothing else in my life had felt right for a long time. "I will need to send word to my father," I said practically. "Let him know I am safe and where I will be. But after that, if you truly do not mind, I would like to stay for the winter." "I do not mind at all," Freya said softly. "I would like that very much." The next few days fell into a pleasant pattern. We rose with the sun and worked together to maintain the cabin and gather supplies. I proved to be a decent hunter, and between my skills and Freya's, we managed to bring down a young elk that provided fresh meat for the first time since I arrived. Freya showed me how to butcher and preserve it properly, and I shared what I knew about smoking meat from my years on the farm. We talked constantly, learning each other's stories and histories. I discovered that Freya loved music but had no talent for singing, which did not stop her from humming tunelessly while she worked. She learned that I had a terrible habit of leaving my boots wherever I took them off, much to her exasperation. These small domestic details felt impossibly precious, little pieces of understanding that built the foundation of something deeper. One evening, about a week after the storm ended, I was carving a new handle for a broken axe while Freya mended her hunting cloak by the fire. The silence was comfortable, broken only by the crackling flames and the scrape of my knife against wood. "Can I ask you something personal?" I said eventually. Freya looked up from her stitching. "You can ask. I may not answer." "Fair enough. When you saved those children, the ones your clan wanted to kill, was that the first time you had helped humans?" She was quiet for a moment, needle poised above the leather. "No," she said finally. "There were other times, small ones, leaving warnings when I knew a raid was coming, driving game toward a starving settlement instead of away from it. I told myself it did not matter, that no one would notice." She resumed her stitching. "But I think my chieftain suspected. When I openly defied him to save that family, it was the excuse he needed to be rid of me." "Do you regret it?" I asked. "Not the saving them part, but the cost to you. Some days," she admitted. "When the loneliness gets too heavy, or when I am cold and hungry and remember the warmth of the clan fires. But then I think about those children, and I know I would make the same choice again." She glanced at me. "Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," I said. "The right choice is not always the easy one." "No," she agreed. "It is not." I went back to my carving, thinking about my own choices. Running away from my father's plans had been the easy part. Figuring out what I actually wanted was much harder. But sitting here in this cabin with Freya, I felt like I was starting to find some answers. "Thank you," I said impulsively. Freya looked confused. "For what?" "For letting me stay. For giving me a chance to figure things out." I gestured around the cabin. "This is not what I expected when I left home, but it is exactly what I needed." Her expression softened. "I am glad you are here, Isaac. It is better than being alone." "Much better," I agreed. As winter deepened, we settled into our life in the cabin with surprising ease. We hunted together, tracked game through the snow-covered forest, and learned to read each other's movements with the wordless communication of longtime partners. Freya taught me orcish tracking techniques that were far more sophisticated than anything I had learned on the farm, and I shared my knowledge of the local terrain and wildlife. The physical work was hard but satisfying, and I found myself growing stronger, my body adapting to the demands of this new life. But it was the evenings I treasured most, when we would sit by the fire and talk for hours, sharing stories and dreams and comfortable silences. I learned that Freya had a dry sense of humor that caught me off guard and made me laugh until my sides ached. She learned that I had a terrible singing voice but loved music anyway, and she would sit patiently while I butchered old ballads with more enthusiasm than skill. We played dice and cards, told each other stories from our childhoods, and slowly, carefully, built something that felt like home. But there was also a growing tension between us, unspoken but undeniable. I found my eyes lingering on the curve of Freya's jaw, the strength in her shoulders, the way the firelight turned her green skin to gold. I caught her watching me sometimes too, her yellow eyes dark with something I did not quite dare to name. We were careful not to touch each other too much, as if both of us knew that once we started, we might not be able to stop. But sometimes our hands would brush while passing a cup or working together, and the contact sent sparks through my nerves. One particularly cold night, about a month after I arrived, I woke to find the fire had burned dangerously low. I got up quickly to feed it, shivering in the frigid air. Even with my blankets piled on, I had been cold enough to wake, which meant Freya must be freezing in the corner where she insisted on sleeping. "Freya," I called softly, "are you awake?" "Yes," came her voice from the darkness. "The cold woke me." I built up the fire until it was roaring again, but it would take time for the cabin to warm up. We could not afford to let the fire go out completely in this weather, or we might not survive the night. We should sleep closer to the fire, I said. Both of us. It is too cold to maintain separate spaces. There was a long pause. Then Freya said, "Are you certain?" "I trust you," I said simply. "Do you trust me?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. We arranged our bedding close to the hearth, near enough to share warmth but with careful space between us. I could hear Freya breathing in the darkness, could feel the heat of her body even through the space that separated us. "Isaac," she said after a while. "Yes. Thank you for trusting me. I know humans are taught to fear orcs." "You are the least frightening person I have ever met," I said honestly. "Well, except when you are tracking. Then you are terrifying," she laughed softly. "You are not so bad yourself for a human, even if you do leave your boots everywhere." "I am working on that," I protested. "No, you are not." "No," I admitted. "I am really not." We both laughed, and the sound felt warm and intimate in the darkness. I fell asleep listening to Freya's breathing, feeling safer and more content than I had in years. When I woke in the morning, I discovered that at some point during the night, we had drifted together in our sleep. Freya's back was pressed against my chest, and my arm was draped over her waist. I froze, afraid to move and wake her, afraid to break this moment of perfect peace. But then I felt her hand cover mine where it rested on her stomach, her fingers lacing through mine. She was awake. "Is this all right?" I whispered. "Yes," she said, her voice rough with sleep. "Is it all right for you?" "Yes," I said. "More than all right." We stayed like that for a long time, watching the morning light creep across the floor, neither of us willing to break the spell. Eventually, practicality won out and we had to get up to start the day's work, but something had changed. The careful distance we had maintained was gone, replaced by a comfortable closeness that felt natural and right. That night, and every night after, we slept curled together near the fire. Freya fit perfectly against me, her larger frame solid and warm. I had never felt so safe or so at peace. As the weeks passed, I realized I was falling in love with her. The realization should have terrified me, but instead it felt like coming home. Every moment with Freya felt right in a way nothing else ever had. Her strength and courage, her dry humor and surprising gentleness, the way she looked at me like I was someone worth knowing, all of it combined into something that took my breath away. But I did not know if she felt the same way. Orcs and humans did not fall in love. That was not how the world worked. The prejudice ran too deep, the differences too great. Even if she cared for me, there was no future for us together. I would be shunned by my people, and she was already exiled from hers. I tried to be content with what we had, this stolen winter of peace and companionship. I told myself it was enough, but my heart wanted more. One afternoon in late winter, we were out checking the trap lines when Freya suddenly grabbed my arm and pulled me behind a large boulder. I opened my mouth to ask what was wrong, but she pressed a finger to her lips and pointed. Through the trees, I could see figures moving. 4 orcs, armed and armored, moving through the forest with clear purpose. One of them called out in the orcish tongue, words I did not understand. Freya's face had gone pale, her yellow eyes wide with fear. She watched the orcs pass, her whole body tense as a drawn bow. We stayed hidden until they were long gone, and even then she kept her hand on her knife. "Scouts from my old clan," she whispered finally. "They are hunting something." "Do you think they are hunting you?" I asked, alarmed. "I do not know. They should not be this far north in winter unless something has driven them here." She looked at me. "We need to get back to the cabin. Now." We moved quickly and quietly through the forest. All the skills Freya had taught me put to use as we covered our tracks and stayed to the hard ground where we would leave no footprints. By the time we reached the cabin, it was getting dark, and I was breathing hard from the fast pace. Freya barricaded the door and checked every shutter, making sure they were secure. Then she pulled out her weapons, laying out her bow and arrows, her hunting knife, and a short sword I had not known she owned. "Freya, what is going on?" I asked, trying to stay calm. She turned to me, and I could see the fear in her eyes. "If they find me here, they will kill me. That is the law. An exiled orc who is found must die, no exceptions." "Then we will not let them find you," I said firmly. "We can hide your things, make it look like a human hunter is staying here alone. They have no reason to think you would be this far north." "And if they search the cabin," she asked, "if they question you?" "I will not tell them anything," I promised. "Freya, I will keep you safe, I swear it." She looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right. We hide everything that marks this place as mine. If they come, you will tell them you are a hunter from the valley, waiting out the winter." We worked quickly, stashing Freya's distinctive belongings in a hidden cache beneath the floorboards. Her orcish weapons and tools, her clan markings, anything that would identify her. By the time we finished, the cabin looked like it belonged to a solitary human hunter. That night, we took turns on watch. I insisted Freya sleep first since she would be better able to fight if it came to that, but I could tell she was too anxious to rest properly. I sat by the window, peering out into the darkness, every sense straining for signs of movement. Nothing happened that night or the next day, but the tension did not fade. We stayed close to the cabin, ready to hide at a moment's notice. I could see the stress weighing on Freya, the way her shoulders were always tight, her hand never far from a weapon. On the third night, she finally broke down. I found her sitting by the fire with her head in her hands, her whole body shaking. "Freya," I knelt beside her, touching her shoulder gently. "What is wrong?" "I am so tired of running," she said, her voice thick with tears. "Tired of hiding and being afraid, tired of being alone." "You are not alone," I said firmly. "I am here." "For how long?" she asked, looking up at me with eyes full of pain. "Until the spring thaw, until you remember you have a life to go back to." "I am grateful for this winter, Isaac, but we both know it cannot last." The words hit me like a blow. "Is that what you think? That I am just passing time until I can leave?" "Why else would you be here?" she asked. "You are a human. I am an exiled orc. We have no future together." "The hell we do not," I said, surprising myself with the vehemence in my voice. "Freya, I am not staying here out of convenience or charity. I am staying because I want to be here, with you." She stared at me. "What are you saying?" "I am saying I love you," I said, the words tumbling out raw and honest. "I love your strength and your courage. I love the way you hum when you are working and the way you make terrible jokes when you think I am not listening. I love sleeping beside you and waking up with you and spending every moment of every day with you. I do not care that you are an orc and I am a human. I only care that you are you, and I am completely and utterly in love with you." Freya's eyes were wide, her mouth slightly open in shock. For a terrible moment, I thought I had made a horrible mistake, that I had ruined everything. Then she was kissing me, her hands framing my face, her lips fierce and desperate against mine. I kissed her back with everything I had, pouring months of longing and hope into the contact. She tasted like pine smoke and the mint tea we had drunk with dinner, and her tusks were smooth against my lips. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard. Freya rested her forehead against mine, her eyes closed. "I love you too," she whispered. "I have loved you for weeks, but I was too afraid to say it, too afraid you would leave if you knew." "I am not going anywhere," I promised. "Not without you." She pulled back to look at me, her hands still cradling my face. "Your family can learn to accept it or not, that is their choice," I said. "But I am making my choice now, and I choose you. I choose this life we have built together. I choose us." Freya smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Us," she repeated softly. "I like the sound of that." We kissed again, slower this time, exploring and savoring. Her hands moved to my shoulders, pulling me closer, and I wrapped my arms around her waist. We fit together perfectly, all the pieces of a puzzle I had not known I was trying to solve. When we finally settled back in front of the fire, we sat pressed together, her head on my shoulder and my arm around her waist. The fear of the orc scouts had not gone away, but it felt manageable now, something we would face together. "What will we do if they come?" Freya asked quietly. "We will deal with it," I said, "together, just like we have dealt with everything else." She nodded against my shoulder. "Together," she agreed. The orc scouts did not return, at least not to our part of the forest. After a week with no further signs of them, we began to relax again, though we remained cautious. The winter was starting to loosen its grip, and with the approaching spring came decisions that could no longer be postponed. "I need to go back to my father's farm," I said one morning over breakfast. "Just to let him know I am alive and to collect my things. I will tell him I am not coming back to stay." Freya's hand tightened on her cup. "Will you tell him about me, if you want me to?" I said carefully. "But I understand if you would rather I did not. It might be safer to keep it quiet." She was quiet for a long moment, then said, "Tell him. I am tired of hiding what I am, and I will not ask you to lie to your family for me. It will not be easy," I warned. "He may not accept it. The whole village may turn against us." "I know," Freya said. "But we cannot build a life together on lies and secrets. If your father cannot accept me, then at least we will know where we stand." I took her hand across the table. "You are very brave." "I am terrified," she admitted, "but I am tired of being afraid, and I trust you." We decided to go together when the snow melted enough for travel. I would not leave Freya alone in the cabin, not with orc scouts potentially in the area. Besides, I wanted her with me, wanted the support of her presence when I faced my father. The journey took 3 days through the thawing mountain pass. The trail was treacherous with mud and melting snow, but we managed it together. As we descended toward the valley where my father's farm lay, I could see Freya growing more nervous, her hand never far from her knife. "What if they attack me on sight?" she asked as we made camp on the final night. "They will not," I said with more confidence than I felt. "You will be with me, and they know me. They will at least listen before they do anything stupid." "You have more faith in your people than I do," Freya said dryly. "Probably," I admitted. "But I have to believe we can make them understand, that we can find a way forward." She reached out and took my hand, squeezing gently. "No matter what happens tomorrow, I want you to know that this winter with you has been the happiest time of my life." "Mine too," I said, bringing her hand to my lips and kissing her knuckles. "And it is not ending tomorrow. This is just the beginning." We approached my father's farm at midday, when people would be out working and less likely to panic. I had suggested Freya wait in the woods, but she refused, insisting she would not hide anymore. So we walked together up the dirt road that led to the farm, me in my travel-stained clothes and her in her furs with her weapons clearly visible. We were spotted long before we reached the house. I could see people stopping their work to stare, could hear voices calling out in alarm. By the time we reached the farmyard, my father was standing on the porch with a hunting bow in his hands, and several neighbors had gathered behind him, armed with whatever tools and weapons they could grab. "Isaac." My father lowered the bow slightly, his weathered face a mask of shock. "By all the gods, boy, where have you been? We thought you were dead." "I am fine, father," I called out. "I survived the storm in a mountain cabin. This is Freya. She took me in and kept me alive." The crowd murmured at that, eyes fixed on Freya with a mixture of fear and hostility. She stood tall and calm beside me, but I could feel the tension in her body. "That is an orc," my father said slowly, as if I might not have noticed. "She is a person," I corrected. "She saved my life when I would have frozen to death. She is my friend and my partner, and I am asking you to welcome her." The murmuring grew louder, and I could hear angry voices in the mix. My father held up a hand for silence. "Isaac, come inside. We need to talk. Alone." "No," I said firmly. "Anything you need to say to me, you can say in front of Freya." My father's face darkened. "Boy, you do not understand what you are doing." "That creature, her name is Freya," I interrupted. "And if you cannot treat her with basic courtesy, then I have nothing more to say to you." The silence that followed was heavy and dangerous. I could see the shock on my father's face, could feel the crowd's hostility like a physical presence. Beside me, Freya remained utterly still, though her hand was on her knife. Then an older woman pushed through the crowd, someone I recognized as Mistress Harrows, the village healer. She studied Freya for a long moment, then looked at me. "This orc saved your life?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "She shared her shelter and her supplies, asked for nothing in return. Without her, I would not be standing here." Mistress Harrows nodded slowly, then turned to the crowd. "The old laws say a life debt is sacred. If this orc saved Isaac's life, we owe her hospitality by the ancient customs." There was a murmur of reluctant agreement. The old customs were taken seriously here, even if people did not like where they led. My father looked like he wanted to argue, but finally he lowered his bow completely. "Fine. Come inside, both of you, but I want an explanation for all of this." The crowd parted reluctantly as we walked through. I could feel eyes on us, hear whispered speculation. Freya walked with her head high, meeting hostile gazes with calm dignity. Inside the house, my father gestured for us to sit at the kitchen table. He did not sit himself, instead pacing back and forth with barely contained agitation. "Start talking," he said, "and it had better be good." So I told him everything. The storm, finding the cabin, discovering Freya already there, our decision to wait out the winter together, learning to trust each other and eventually falling in love. I left nothing out, speaking clearly and honestly about my feelings and my intentions. When I finished, my father was staring at me like I had grown a second head. "You are in love with an orc," he said flatly. "Yes," I confirmed. "And you plan to spend your life with her?" "Yes." He turned to Freya. "What do you have to say about this, orc?" Freya met his eyes steadily. "I love your son, Master Sanders. I know this is difficult for you to accept, and I understand if you cannot welcome me. But I will not apologize for loving him, and I will not let anyone take him from me." The fierce protectiveness in her voice made my heart swell. My father seemed taken aback by it, some of his hostility fading into confusion. "You really do love him," he said, sounding surprised. "With everything I am," Freya said simply. My father sat down heavily at the table, suddenly looking old and tired. "This is not the life I wanted for you, Isaac. I wanted you to marry Isabella to take over the farm to give me grandchildren." "I know," I said gently, "but that was never what I wanted. I tried to tell you, but you would not listen. This life with Freya, it is what I choose. It is what I want." "And what kind of life can you have?" he asked. "The village will never accept her. You will be outcasts." "Then we will go somewhere else," I said. "Start fresh where no one knows us. It will not be easy, but we will have each other." My father looked between us, his expression unreadable. Finally, he said, "You are my son, Isaac. You are all I have left of your mother. I do not want to lose you." "You do not have to," I said. "But you have to accept that I am making my own choices now. You have to accept Freya." The silence stretched out, painful and heavy. Then my father sighed deeply and turned to Freya. "Can you help run a farm?" he asked. Freya blinked in surprise. "I am a hunter and a ranger, but I am strong and I can learn. If you are offering work, I will pull my weight." "I am old," my father said bluntly, "and this farm is too much for one man. Isaac never wanted it, but maybe with a partner to help, he might find it more tolerable. There is a small cottage on the north edge of the property. It needs work, but it is sound. You could live there." He looked at me. "If that is what you want." I felt tears prickling my eyes. It was not acceptance exactly, not yet. But it was a start. An olive branch extended despite his fears and prejudices. "Thank you, Father," I said quietly. He nodded gruffly. "I am doing this for you, not for her, but if she is going to be part of your life, then I suppose I will have to get used to it." He stood up. "I will talk to the village council, see if I can smooth things over, but I cannot promise they will be welcoming." "I am not asking for welcome," Freya said, "only that they leave us in peace." "That I think I can manage," my father said. He paused at the door, looking back at us. "Your mother would have liked her," he said to me. "Your mother always did have a soft spot for strays and outcasts." Then he was gone, leaving Freya and me alone in the kitchen. We looked at each other, and I saw my own disbelief and relief reflected in her face. "That went better than I expected," I said shakily. "Your father is a good man," Freya said. "Even if he does not like me, he loves you enough to try." "We are really going to do this," I said, the reality of it hitting me. "We are going to make a life here." "Together," Freya said, taking my hand. "Is that what you want?" "More than anything," I promised. The next few weeks were difficult but not impossible. True to his word, my father spoke to the village council and invoked the old customs about life debts and sacred hospitality. The village agreed, grudgingly, to let Freya stay. There were conditions, of course. She could not carry weapons within the village proper, and she had to stay on our property unless accompanied by me or my father. It was restrictive and insulting, but Freya bore it with patient dignity. We moved into the cottage on the north edge of the farm, spending our days fixing the roof and patching the walls and making it into a home. It was hard work, but we had done harder things together. And every evening, we would sit on the porch we had built with our own hands, watching the sun set over the valley, and I would feel a bone-deep contentment I had never known before. The villagers remained wary of Freya, but as time passed and nothing terrible happened, some of the hostility faded. She helped my father with the heavy work around the farm, and even he had to admit she was a tireless worker. She showed some of the younger farmhands better techniques for tracking and dealing with predators, and slowly, grudgingly, they began to respect her knowledge. Mistress Harrows became an unlikely ally, curious about orcish healing practices, and eager to learn from Freya's experience as a healer's daughter. The two of them would spend hours discussing herbal remedies and treatment techniques, and I think Mistress Harrows saw in Freya a kindred spirit, someone else who valued knowledge over prejudice. Spring turned to summer, and our garden flourished under Freya's careful tending. She had a gift for growing things that surprised both of us, and soon we had more vegetables than we could use. We shared the surplus with our neighbors, and it became harder for them to maintain their hostility in the face of fresh tomatoes and crisp lettuce. One warm evening in late summer, I found Freya sitting on our porch, watching the fireflies dance over the fields. She looked peaceful and content, and I felt my heart swell with love for her. "I have something for you," I said, pulling a small cloth bundle from my pocket. She looked curious as I unwrapped it, revealing 2 simple rings I had commissioned from the village blacksmith. They were made of iron, sturdy and unadorned, but I had asked him to engrave the inside of each one with our initials entwined. "Freya Frostborn," I said, dropping to one knee before her. "You saved my life in that mountain cabin. You taught me what it means to truly love someone. You have endured prejudice and suspicion with dignity and grace, all for the chance to build a life with me. I know we cannot have a traditional wedding, not here, not yet, but I want you to be my wife in every way that matters. Will you marry me?" Freya's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded, unable to speak. I slipped the ring onto her finger, and she took the other ring and did the same for me, her hands shaking slightly. "I love you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I love you so much, Isaac Sanders." "I love you too," I said, pulling her into my arms. "My wife." We held each other as the sun set and the stars came out, and I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. We had weathered a mountain storm and human prejudice, and we had come out stronger for it. My father, to his credit, made an effort to be kind to Freya. He would never be effusive or warm, but he was fair, and over time I saw something like respect growing between them. At harvest time, he insisted on throwing a small feast to celebrate, and he invited Freya and me to sit at the head of the table as honored guests. "To my son and his wife," he said, raising a cup of cider. "May they find happiness together, wherever that leads." It was not a traditional blessing, but it was genuine, and I saw Freya blink back tears at the acceptance in his words. The other farmhands raised their cups as well, some more enthusiastically than others, but it was a start. As winter approached again, Freya and I prepared our cottage for the cold months ahead. We had good stores of food, plenty of firewood, and each other. The memory of that first winter in the mountain cabin felt distant now, but also precious, the foundation on which we had built everything else. One snowy evening, as we sat by our own hearth in our own home, Freya turned to me with a mischievous smile. "Do you remember what you said when we first met?" she asked. "I said a lot of things," I replied, pretending to think. "Most of them very articulate and impressive, as I recall," she laughed. "You were half frozen and terrified. But when I told you the storm would last through the night, I said we would wait it out together. Do you remember?" "I remember," I said softly. "I think we are still waiting it out together," she said. "Not the storm, but everything else, all the challenges and changes. We are waiting them out together." I pulled her close, resting my chin on top of her head. "Together," I agreed. "Always together." Outside, the wind picked up, howling around the corners of the cottage. But inside, we were warm and safe, wrapped in each other's arms. We had found something rare and precious in that mountain cabin, something worth fighting for and protecting. We had found each other, and that was enough. As the months turned into years, our life together became less remarkable to the villagers, and more accepted as simply part of the fabric of the community. Freya's skill as a tracker and her knowledge of the forest made her invaluable during the lean winter months, and even the most stubborn holdouts had to admit she contributed more than her share. We never had an official wedding in the human tradition, but Mistress Harrows performed a quiet binding ceremony for us in the privacy of our cottage, witnessed only by my father and her apprentice. It was simple and perfect, and when it was done, I knew that whatever else happened, we were bound together in a way that transcended law or custom. My father's health began to fail as he entered his 70th year, and Freya nursed him with the same care she had once shown to injured animals in the forest. He held her hand on his deathbed and told her she was a good daughter, that he was glad I had found her. When he passed, she mourned him as genuinely as I did, and I loved her all the more for it. The farm became ours then, and we ran it together with the help of hired hands who had grown up accepting Freya as part of the landscape. Some of them brought their children to meet her, asking her to teach them tracking skills, and she did so with patience and kindness. 5 years after that first winter in the mountain cabin, Freya came to me with news that shocked us both. She was pregnant, something we had been told was nearly impossible for human orc couples. But there it was, undeniable and miraculous. Our daughter was born on the first day of spring, with green-tinged skin lighter than her mother's and the beginnings of small tusks. She had my brown eyes and Freya's black hair, and she was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. We named her Ilona, and she became the joy of our lives. The village children were fascinated by Ilona, and as she grew, she moved easily between the human and orcish parts of her heritage, belonging wholly to both and neither. She would never face the prejudice her mother had, because she was one of their own, raised among them and loved by them. More families came to settle near us over the years, drawn by the promise of good land and tolerant neighbors. Some of them were mixed couples like us, humans and orcs who had fallen in love despite the odds. We welcomed them all, and slowly the area became known as a place where such unions were accepted. Freya and I grew old together, our hair going gray, our bodies bearing the marks of hard work and harder winters. But we were happy, surrounded by the life we had built and the family we had raised. Our cottage, once a symbol of defiance and hope, had become simply home. One winter evening, when we were both old and satisfied with our years, we sat on the porch wrapped in blankets, watching the snow fall softly over the valley. It reminded me of that first storm so long ago when a desperate human stumbled into a mountain cabin and found an orc stranger who changed everything. "You ever regret it?" I asked Freya. "Leaving the wandering life behind, settling down here?" She was quiet for a moment, then smiled. "Never. This is what I was searching for all those years, even when I did not know it. A home. A family. We will wait it out together," I said, echoing those first words she had spoken to me all those years ago. "Always," she agreed, taking my hand in hers. The snow fell around us, soft and peaceful, and I felt the same contentment I had felt on that very first morning when I woke in the mountain cabin and realized I was not alone. We had weathered every storm together, and we would weather whatever came next the same way, together. Always together. Our story was not one of grand adventures or epic quests. It was smaller than that, more intimate. It was the story of two lonely people who found each other in a storm and decided to build something lasting from that chance encounter. It was about choosing love over fear, acceptance over prejudice, and creating a future that neither of us could have imagined alone. And in the end, that was more than enough. It was everything. Years later, when both Freya and I had passed peacefully into the next world, our granddaughter would tell our story to her own children. She would speak of the mountain cabin and the blizzard, of the human and the orc who defied expectations to build a life together. She would show them the rings we had worn, the engravings worn smooth with time but still legible, our initials forever entwined. And she would tell them the most important lesson we had learned in that cabin so long ago. That love is not defined by species or custom or tradition, but by the choice to stand together against whatever storms may come. That home is not a place but a person, and family is built on acceptance and respect and the daily choice to care for each other. The village that had once feared and rejected an orc stranger became a place where diversity was celebrated, where mixed families were welcomed, and where the old prejudices slowly faded into history. And it all started because a human and an orc were snowbound in a mountain cabin together, and one of them said, "We will wait it out together." That simple promise became the foundation of everything that followed. It became a legacy that outlasted both of us, a testament to what is possible when we choose love over fear, when we reach out to the stranger instead of turning them away. In the end, our story was not about an orc or a human. It was about two people who found each other when they needed it most, who built something beautiful from unpromising circumstances, and who proved that the boundaries we draw between ourselves and others are far more fragile than we believe. The mountain cabin still stands, maintained by our descendants as a reminder of where it all began. Visitors come sometimes, couples in love who face their own obstacles and prejudices, and they sit by the hearth where Freya and I first shared a fire. They find hope in our story, courage to face their own challenges, and sometimes, on winter nights when the wind howls through the mountain pass, you can almost hear the echo of words spoken long ago. We will wait it out together. A promise kept, a love that endured, and a future built on the simple decision to see the person behind the prejudice, the heart behind the fear. That is our story. That is our legacy. And it began with a storm, a cabin, and two strangers who chose to become something more.